Hello everyone and welcome to Was It Worth It, brought to you by SharcTank Media. I'm Tim.
And I'm Dane.
Was It Worth It, of course, is a game review podcast where me and Dane play a game, discuss it, and then tell you whether or not it's worth that scratch.
The scratch, for those who don't know, in the layman's terms, being the money.
On the street, that's what we say.
The Skrilla. No, okay, so this week we played our biggest game yet, South Park: The Stick of Truth, developed mainly by Obsidian Entertainment, who are known for some other big RPGs like Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic 2, Fallout New Vegas, and Neverwinter Nights 2 as well. This game is, as you probably guessed, an RPG set in the South Park universe. And as far as the RPG aspects of the game go, there's plenty of dialogue, quests, and equipment. The town of South Park, with every location from the show and then some, is fully explorable, and the battle system is turn-based and feels kind of like the Paper Mario games. As far as the South Park aspects go, this game looks, feels, and of course sounds exactly like an episode of South Park in almost every way possible, and it should, because Matt and Trey, the show's creators and big gamers themselves, had a major role in the game's production.
Right.
So we're pretty sure, actually, that every single one of South Park's 247 episodes are referenced in the game in one, some way, shape, or form.
I can't confirm that all of them, because I didn't actually do every side quest and everything like that, but based on what I saw, I would be surprised if every episode wasn't referenced.
Yeah. I mean, it's obvious that this game was made for South Park fans before pretty much anyone else. And of the two of us, you're the much bigger South Park fan by far. So why don't you go ahead and just launch right into how you felt about the game.
Right. So this was our first $60 game, and I thought, you know what, I was excited for the challenge of justifying a $60 game. I thought it would be different than a $15 or $20 game like we've been doing before, because obviously that's a much bigger portion of your income to justify spending on a game. But it turned out that this game was actually a lot simpler to rate than I expected. So the game lacks polish. However, they set out to do one thing. They set out to make a game that feels, sounds, and looks exactly like South Park. They wanted you, the player, to feel like you were a character in the town, and they achieved that in spades. So that being said, how you feel about the show is basically going to be how you feel about the game. If you love the show, you're going to love the game. If you like the show, you'll probably like the game. If you dislike the show for any reason, for its toilet humor, for its offensive topics, or for its crappy animation, you're going to dislike the game for the same reasons, because the game was just like the show for the most part.
I can't even imagine a scenario, though, where someone who doesn't like South Park or doesn't know anything about South Park, for whatever reason, maybe they're not, from one of the countries where South Park is primarily aired.
Sure.
I can't imagine why they would pick up the game and play it in the first place, though.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I'm a huge South Park fan, so I love the game. Of course it was worth it for me, but just basically, how do you feel about South Park? That's how you're going to feel about the game.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. My history with South Park isn't nearly as straightforward as yours. I mentioned last week that I would occasionally sneak out into the TV room on school nights to watch South Park, like when the first season was airing, because my mom would never have let me watch it otherwise, for obvious reasons to anybody that knows anything about South Park. But I'm not sure if I could say that I was a fan of the show itself. I think it was just extremely popular with the other kids in the 5th grade due to the profanity and the offensive humor, and I had to make sure I was up on it so I could talk about it with the other kids. And I also did drawings of the characters, because out of all my friends, I was the only one with any amount of artistic talent, and the characters were really easy to draw.
Super simple.
Super simple. So I kind of gained a little bit of popularity by giving out drawings of Stan and Cartman or whatever to other kids. But other than that, I didn't actually pay that much attention to the show, and eventually after I moved to California and I kind of got a new group of friends, I pretty much stopped watching South Park altogether, unless it just happened to be on when I was flipping the channels or whatever. Now, don't get me wrong, I really do love the way the show presents the really serious issues while simultaneously making dick and fart jokes. I'm being completely sincere when I say that I actually think that there is a level of genius to how they accomplish that.
Right.
And I do appreciate that about the show. But at the end of the day, I really haven't watched much South Park, and I don't ever see myself sitting down and catching up on the entire series at any point. So that said, a lot of the game's tributes to the show and its fans didn't have that much of an effect on me. I can appreciate its closeness to the source material, but I played the game kind of focusing on the gameplay first, and as an RPG, I did think that it fell a little short. You know, like the combat reminded me of Paper Mario, but it didn't quite feel as tight or in-depth as those games. The combat to me, and granted, I also want to say that I played about 6 hours of the game,
Sure.
so maybe close to half of what the game has to offer. So while there might be more of, in the future, or later on in the game, rather, what I saw in the combat felt like it could have been something out of maybe like a really detailed Flash game. Just
Sure.
the combat specifically.
Yeah.
Now, the dialogue is really good most of the time, but there are a lot of characters who kind of have like one thing that they say to you, and you can't really skip the spoken dialogue most of the time. So, you know, if someone starts saying something really long and annoying sounding, you're kind of forced to listen to it all over again. That might not seem like a big deal, but it did get kind of annoying and grating over time. So other characters, of course, had a lot of really funny and interesting things they would say to you, but occasionally, you know, you'd kind of get the throwaway lines, and you'd hear them a lot. And I kind of didn't really like how the game handled equipment. There wasn't really any solid direction on, like, what types of things you should equip. You know, like, the different weapons had sort of an arbitrary number of damage and how many times it would hit. The armor doesn't have any armor points associated with it at all, just these kind of random enchantments that were sometimes helpful, but usually not really, you know, like, kind of skipped over almost everything.
Yeah,
like,
a lot of, well, I mean, there were several ones that were just straight up jokes.
Yeah, that's true. And although that's kind of funny, like, you can understand where they were going with a piece of armor that, you know, has an enchantment on it that's like, what was it, the goth armor?
Oh, every turn you lose faith in humanity, or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's no humanity stat or faith in humanity
exactly.
stat. It's
so
just a joke.
It actually doesn't do anything.
So that's funny. Like, I get that, but you know, 9 out of 10 of the new weapons and armor that I would get from combat or in chests were completely useless and just kind of padded my inventory. Possibly because you only outfit a single character in this game and not an entire party like most RPGs.
Sure.
You know, that would have alleviated that a bit. So I guess that's kind of minor, but I just feel like all the aspects of gameplay are kind of average and serve as a vessel to deliver you the world of South Park in all of its glory. As an RPG, I don't think the game is worth $60 for me. I think $40 would have been the right price, just as kind of like a moderate South Park fan. But I absolutely acknowledge the worthiness of this game for someone who loves South Park a lot more than I do. Like you.
Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense. It's just how you feel about the show. That's how you're gonna feel about the game, because a lot of your points I feel like are completely fair, or you know, I agree with some of them. Don't necessarily agree with others.
Sure.
But when it comes down to it, this game isn't about the mechanics. It's not about the combat. It's not about the equipment. Because you talk about equipment, well, there's not just equipment. There's beards and hats and glasses and all these. There's so much flavor to this game.
Yeah, the vanity stuff.
There's for every piece of equipment you can use that's a weapon, there's 10 things that are flair. You know what I mean?
I have to say, though, as far as the flair stuff goes, like, I kind of smiled a little bit every time I saw a piece of flair that, you know, I thought was funnier, that I liked the look of, but I didn't feel any desire to do anything with it, just because I was playing a single-player game in my room by myself, and, you know, I guess if I was more stoked on it and I was taking screenshots of my guy and sharing them on social networks and stuff, then maybe I would care more. Maybe they could have implemented, you know, like a share your character thing, because there is a Facebook in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if they implemented something like that, which, I mean, that would be such a last-minute thing for them to do, considering there's all this other stuff that wasn't polished, but still. Like,
right, yeah.
I feel like if I had a reason to share my character, then I would have dressed him up and all this sorts of different crap.
Yeah, and in true South Park fashion, this game was delayed, and it was rushed to a point. So
yeah,
there's lots of things that they could have done, but I'm sure they just wanted to they were happy with the game as it was, so they wanted to get it out. But I mean, not just it, you know, there's lots of flavor and lots of flair and everything, but almost every single thing that you can get, from a beard to a piece of glasses to a tattoo you can get, is a reference to an episode.
Yeah.
I want to say every single one was, at some point.
Sure.
And same with all the junk. There's junk items you can get. Just like any RPG, there's junk, right?
Yeah.
There's always something that vendor trash, as most people call it in the MMO world anyway. And every single piece of junk was a reference to some show or some character or something in the show. And
Sure.
they all had, you know, every weapon, every piece of junk, every piece of flair, all had a description. You know what I mean?
Well, like
there was something
98%
written.
of them had something that was clearly referencing an episode, whereas there were certain ones that's just like broken glass.
Yeah.
It's sharp, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, but even then it would say something like, you know, you can get like crumpled up paper, and it'll say like, you never know when you might need crumpled up paper or something. You know what I mean?
Is that from an episode?
You know, it might be,
Because it seemed pretty generic, the crumpled up paper. And
Yeah,
so there were a
I
couple
don't think
like
that.
that.
There was some that were, I don't know.
But
Anyway.
then again, I'm sure even the most obscure references are little cool things for the bigger fans
Right.
to recognize.
Yeah, but you know, having said all this, I loved the humor. You know, obviously it's the same humor that you expect from the show.
Absolutely the same from the show. Like they clearly wrote most everything. Like Matt and Trey probably wrote the entire game and then just handed it to the developers to, you know.
Sure, yeah.
That's where the South Park Studios
section and I know they had a really active role in creating this game. They did.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because basically what the history is that there's been several South Park games released in the past. Most recently just cheap little mobile games like what's it called? South Park Tower Defense.
Tower Defense. Yeah.
A lot of the earlier games, like the original game that came out on like Nintendo 64, and then South Park Rally that came out on PlayStation, those were crappy games. And Matt and Trey said, "Look, this needs to stop. Sure. We need to make a game that us, as people who love video games, would actually enjoy playing." You know what I mean?
So I'm sure part of the wait was just waiting for technology to allow for it. I mean, I know that sounds like I'm joking, but like I think part of what strings a game like that together, no matter how crappy it actually looks, I'm sure still requires more than you might think.
Yeah, that's true. Because I mean, the animations in this game were completely fluid. It just looked like you were watching an episode of South Park.
Yeah, and just having that amount of spoken dialogue in a game. I don't know if there were games back in, you know, the late 90s on like N64 and whatever that had that much like high quality audio file in there. So even that, you know, things like that you just don't really think about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, one thing I was going to say is, even from a hardcore South Park fan, the game wasn't perfect. There were some jokes that were literally word for word taken out of an episode, and I thought that was kind of cheap, just to word for word take a joke that came from the show. I mean, it's one thing to reference it, or one thing to reference a joke that came out of that episode, but to take it word for word, I don't know. In that case, it's almost like this is for the people who haven't seen South Park. But then again, like you said, who is going to play this game who hasn't seen South Park?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were some where they used a joke word for word, but still within the mechanics of a video game that kind of freshened it up. Like I mentioned this to you the other night. You can invest $20 to the banker. And of course, if you're familiar with that episode and that joke, you know, Stan invests money and the banker immediately, or he puts money in an account, the banker immediately tries to invest it into all these different places, and then it goes away.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's gone.
And it's gone. And so that was from an episode that was referencing the economic crisis from a few years back.
Sure.
So you know, it made sense in that context. In this show, it was like it was a joke in a joke, because it was like, this banker wants my money. There's no way it's just going to disappear like it does in the episode.
And plenty of games, it's like, do you want to give this NPC a bunch of money? And it's like, well, that is a lot, but I know it's going to have a return for me.
Sure.
There has to be a mechanic where it comes back to me somehow.
Yeah, because there's like a part where you're talking to Clyde, and he's running a shop, and he says, you know, would you like to take a look at my wares, or for $2 I'll give you tips and rumors? And then you click tips and rumors, and he says, you shouldn't waste money on tips and rumors. Like, that's his response. And there's things like, you know, something I forgot to mention is this is a game, and it's South Park, but it's also a giant parody of video games. Like, there's so many games in this industry that have been that are parodied in that game. And it's great because you're like because you're playing the kids who are playing make-believe, you know what I mean? It's essentially a LARP. You're playing a LARP, right? So there's a part where you're walking through Cartman's house, and you go up to, and you get the dialogue option to talk to his mom, and you click it, and Cartman goes, don't talk to her, she's not part of the game, you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's like, there's a lot of jokes just about the game itself, and I even aside from the South Park stuff, I thought it was great how they parodied the gaming industry these days.
Yeah, they did a good job of that, especially. I mean, I hope this isn't spoiling too much and giving away some of the better jokes, but if you've ever played a game where there's a ton of audio logs, like any of the BioShock games or Dead Space, where there's just audio logs where random characters are just saying things like, oh, this stuff was happening, and it gives you kind of maybe minor little glimpses into the story. Yeah, there's a whole section where you find audio logs, and the guy's like, I don't even know why I'm leaving these audio logs. I'm in a really dangerous situation.
Yeah, I don't have time to be doing this. Or I'm trying to find a way out, and all I'm finding are all these audio logs. So many audio logs, and they're not telling me anything. Like,
yeah, my favorite one was, I found one audio log that was actually kind of cool. This lady told me the combination to this thing, and I wouldn't have known the combination before I listened to it.
Exactly. She talked about how she put something in a drawer somewhere, and then gave me the combination. I don't know if I'll ever find that drawer, but just in case I do, it's nice to know I'll have the combination, things like that.
Yeah, it was.
But I think we should stop spoilers, because there's just so much in this game that the shock value or you know, just something unexpected, it's great.
And like I said, if it didn't have that, you know, for me, it wouldn't have been as worthwhile just as a game itself, just by itself.
Sure.
So all of that shock and everything, you know, South Park related or otherwise that is funny or just, you know, entertaining, I mean, that's where it's at.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't have much more to say about this game. It's
yeah, I mean,
South Park.
We could have.
That's all. I could have just said, "Hey, it's
Yeah.
a game where it's South Park," and that would have told you everything you needed to know. Cause
Pretty much.
So, what game are we playing next?
Next week, we are going to play Titanfall. So it's kind of funny, at the beginning of this episode, I said we're playing our biggest game yet. I mean, technically, while they're both $60, Titanfall is just a huge, highly anticipated next-gen title. So
Yeah, I've already played it a little bit so far, but yeah, I'm excited to
Yeah.
dive into it more. And
yeah, exactly.
it'll also be our first primarily, well, I shouldn't say our first primarily multiplayer game, because I guess technically Needhog was supposed to be primarily meant
true.
for multiplayer.
But at least, I mean, it still had a single-player mode where it's just you versus AI, where I'm fairly
Right.
certain in Titanfall the only time that happens is during training.
Well, no, there is a multiplayer campaign.
But the multiplayer campaign, I think it still puts you with other players, doesn't it?
Well, with other players, but not against other players. So
Oh,
you're still
so it's-
fighting against AI, but
Oh, is the multiplayer campaign co-op only then?
yeah.
For some reason, I thought you still fought against other players, and the other players were also getting their own chunk of the story while they fought you.
Oh, well, I guess technically that could be. I honestly don't know.
See, this is how little we know about it
Yeah.
so far. So I
Yeah,
mean,
so-
we're gonna
We'll find out.
yeah, we'll play it a whole bunch, and then we'll be back to let you know if we thought it was worth it. Yeah, I'm really excited to play. I've only done training so far, and that was fun, just kicking off the walls and giant robots.
It's definitely. It'll definitely take time to get into a mindset of all the things that you can do. Like,
Yeah,
like
especially
being able to run on
'cause-
walls and
'cause-
everything.
Yeah, definitely, and then all of the upgrades and stuff. We'll
Sure,
pretty
yeah.
much be upgrading our characters and everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're excited to play it, and of course we'll be back next week to let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as always, please comment if you have any suggestions. Like the video on YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We've got all this other cool stuff that we're always doing, from board games to Let's Plays. We're going to do some Let's Plays of Titanfall as well in our Game
sure,
Chums
yeah.
series. So yeah, please just stick around and check out what we do.
Yeah, and let us know what you think of South Park: The Stick of Truth if you played it.
Yeah, please do. All right, well, you have a nice day.